why did I have so many drinks I can't remember? What's today? October? It's Nudie Magazine Day!
Wouldn't it be nice to be rich like Billy Madison, lay out by the pool every day, and be able to afford any tool that we wanted? Well, I'm here to tell you we may not need those fancy tools. In today's video, we're going to take a look at how we can mill up wood on a budget. So when I first started woodworking, picking out lumber was really confusing to me. There's S2S, there's S3S, and there's even S4S. And the prices of these surface woods is sky high. If you don't believe me, just go to your local Rockler or Woodcraft and take a look at that price tag. So when I first started out, I knew there had to be a cheaper option. Surely not every woodworker's a millionaire, right? And there sure is a cheaper option. There are sawmills all over the country that sell rough cut lumber that you can mill yourself and get S4S lumber at a fraction of the price. Well, in order to mill your own lumber, you gotta have a fancy planer, a fancy joiner, and a fancy table saw. That's just not true. And that's what this video today is gonna be all about. I'm gonna take two pieces of rough cut mahogany off the same board, and we're gonna mill both of them up. The first board is gonna be milled up with some of the tools that I first got when I started woodworking. The second tool is gonna be milled up using the high-end tools that I use today. Then we're gonna compare the two and see how they differ. So what are the tools that we're going to be using for the budget-friendly option? Well, let's go take a look at them. For the budget-friendly option, I'm just going to be using two tools. I'll be using my DeWalt table saw as well as my Craftsman planer. You will notice that I'm not going to be using a jointer for this procedure. For the high-end milling procedure, I'm going to be using three tools. The first tool is this 8-inch jet jointer. Now this thing has got flat blades on it, so it's nothing too fancy. The next thing is the DeWalt planer. Now this thing has been upgraded with a Helix cutter head. The last tool that I'll be using for the high-end milling process will be a 3-horsepower saw stop. And to give you an idea of the cost differences between the budget-friendly method and the high-end method, all the tools you'll need for the budget-friendly method come in at less than $900, while the high-end method comes in excess of $7,500. So obviously there's a huge difference in cost between these two methods. So that's enough talk about the tools. Let's get to milling. So let's take a look at the wood we're dealing with. I've got two pieces of mahogany here that are really weathered and have saw marks on both sides from the sawmill. You can see these boards need a lot of work. So that we can distinguish these two boards, you can see that I've labeled each one. I put a B for the budget option and a HE for the high end. So let's grab the wood with the B label and start the budget milling process. So the first thing that I'm going to do is to place the wood on a flat surface, and typically any table saw will do this trick. And I want to touch the opposite corners and see if there's any rock in the wood. And if you hear that, there's a slight twist in the wood. So what I want to do is to stabilize that rock in the wood. So in order to do that, we need to attach the wood to something that we know is flat and is thin enough to go through that planer. So for me, I like to find something like a scrap piece of plywood. I know that this is fairly flat, and then I can take my mahogany and attach it to the very top of that plywood with some hot glue. Another thing that I like to do is to find some old scrap wood that's really thin. I can use this as a shim where the wood is raised above that plywood to make sure that that wood's got support. I also like to take a piece of scrap wood and make a block in the very back. Let's go do that right now. So the first thing that I'm going to do is take a little piece of scrap wood and make a cleat in the very back. This is going to give the wood support as we push it through the planer. And I'm just going to use some hot glue to attach it to this surface. The next thing I'm going to do is to shim up that corner that's rocking back and forth with that thin piece of wood. Then I can add some hot glue. So now that we have our cleat installed and the corner shimmed with that hot glue, you can now see that our wood is very stable and it's ready to go through the planer. So now with our planer sled made and the wood completely secure to that sled, we're just going to plane down this surface until it's completely smooth and flat. So let's do that now. So now that we have one side surface, we now can place this surface side on the very bottom. And now we can worry about planing the very top of it. So let's do that next. So here I'll take my surface side, flip it over, and now we'll smooth out this side. So now we have a piece of wood that's surfaced on two sides. The top and the bottom are feeling very smooth with just some minor snipe on either edge. So surprisingly, using the budget-friendly option, we're almost done milling up this board. All that's left to do is to clean up both the edges of the board, and we're going to use the table saw for this. In order to clean up our edges, we want to make sure that our table saw blade is exactly at 90. So I'm just going to use a square and place it right up against the blade and just confirm that that blade is at 90 degrees. Once I've confirmed the blade is at 90 degrees, I'll lower the blade until it's just above our workpiece. With the blade in place, I'll nibble off as little as possible. So now that we have one of those edges cleaned up, we essentially have a piece of wood that's surfaced on three sides. Now we're going to flip the board over, inch our fence in just a little bit, and clean up that last side. So now that we've cleaned up that last edge, we now have a board that's essentially milled up and ready to use. Now obviously this is a very rudimentary form of milling, and this will get more tricky as your boards get longer. When you're pushing your boards through the table saw, you just want to make sure that the front of your board and the end of your board are in contact with your fence. If your fence isn't big enough, you can use something like a 2x4 to extend your fence. But just out of curiosity, let's test this piece of wood for square. Now this will be a little bit tricky to show, but this board is completely square as I run my square down the length of the board. Whether I'm doing it on this side, or flip it around and do it on this side. Well, that covers our budget-friendly option for milling. Now let's grab that other piece of wood and test out the high-end method. So my process for milling wood when I'm using my higher end equipment is to start at the jointer. And what I like to do is to face joint one of the sides of wood. And this is simply done by taking a couple of paddles and running it through. Now that I have one side roughly flattened out, I'm going to place that against the fence and tighten up one of the edges. Now as I push the wood through the jointer, I'm making sure that the flat surface that we already jointed is pushed firmly against the fence. So now we essentially have a piece of S2S. We have a face flattened as well as an edge. Now it's time to go over to the planer. So obviously over at the planer, we're going to take our freshly jointed face, flip it over, and surface the other side. So I don't know if I'm like everyone, but I prefer the finish that my planer gives. So I like to take my board and flip it over a couple of times just to finish it off at the planer. So after running this wood through the planer, we now have this wood surfaced on three sides. We only have one more side to clean up, and we're going to do that over at the table saw. So the process over at the table saw is exactly what we did before. We're going to make sure that our blade is exactly at 90, and then we're going to move our fence over just so that just a bit of the edge is trimmed off. With our blade lowered, we'll clean up that last edge. So just like before, we'll test for square, and you can see that this board is completely square going down the length of the board, whether on one side or the other. So what's the difference in these two boards? Well, I'm here to tell you there's not a whole lot of difference. There's some minor variations between these two boards that I think only I can tell. If I place both boards on their face, you can see how nicely they fit together. If I put them on edge, they're essentially seamless. And that really is my point of this video. If you're just starting out, don't be afraid to start milling your own lumber. You're only going to learn how to mill up better lumber the more you practice. Whether you have almost $8,000 worth of tools to mill that lumber up or two tools under $1,000, you can do it if you just give it a try. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video. I know this wasn't the most exciting video in the world. However, I learned a couple of things by it. I learned that you can actually mill up some pretty decent lumber with some basic tools. In fact, there's such little difference between these two pieces of wood, I think most people would be hard-pressed to tell you which one is which. Well, thanks again for watching today, and if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and leave a comment. Let me know how you mill up your lumber. Until next time, take care as always.